The snow made the city feel unfinished, like someone had erased the edges and forgot to redraw them. At midday, the light was brutal. It didn't warm anything. It only reflected. It bounced off drifts piled against burnt-out cars and broken storefronts, turned every flat surface into a glare trap, and pulled long shadows from the skeletal buildings that leaned over the street like tired giants. A Marine squad moved through it anyway, slow and tight, boots placed carefully to keep the crunch down. In cold air, sound traveled differently, sharper, cleaner. A cough sounded like a confession. A step sounded like a flay. They were halfway down a block of collapsed apartments when the point man stepped into the open. The crack that followed was small, thin as a snapped twig, yet it cut the whole world in half. The point man folded without drama, knees buckling, body settling into the snow like he'd simply decided to sit down. For a heartbeat, nobody moved. The squad stayed at him, waiting for the second crack, the follow-up that would make sense of the first. It didn't come. The corpsman's breath fogged in a tight, controlled cloud as he crawled forward. He reached the fallen Marine, fingers probing for a pulse, eyes flicking for blood. A neat hole marked the helmet's side, rimmed with ice crystals where the heat had touched snow. There was no muzzle flash, no glint, no shifting silhouette in any window. Only the faintest ghost of powder smell, carried by a wind that didn't seem strong enough to lift it. Contact! The squad leader snapped, voice low but sharp. He was a staff sergeant with a jaw like a shovel blade and a mind that treated time as a physical enemy. He glanced up, then down, then up again, trying to force the rooftops into giving up a shape. The designated marksman was already on glass, scanning the line of windows, the roof lips, the broken skylights. He found nothing but glare, soot stains, and the blank eyes of a city that had stopped being surprised by violence a long time ago. Nothing, the marksman muttered. No movement. The squad leader tapped his radio. "Hiya, this is..." A burst of static answered, then a broken syllable, then nothing. He tried again on another frequency. The radio hissed like a snake. Somewhere deeper in the static, there was a rhythm, an electronic pulse that didn't belong to the wind. The radio operator shook his head. "Platoon net's not clean. It's like somebody's sitting on it." "Jammed," the squad leader thought. "Or dead zones." Either way, it meant the same thing. They were alone. A second crack snapped through the snow-bright air. A Marine behind a chunk of fallen masonry jerked and went down hard, face planting into the drift. His rifle skittered, half buried in powder. Now the squad moved in earnest. They dug behind the nearest cover. Low, ugly, insufficient. A flat intersection opened ahead, wide as a stage, framed by buildings that offered 100 places to hide and 1,000 angles to shoot from. It was a kill box, clean and deliberate. High ground on three sides. Straight lanes that punished movement. No good exits. "Don't move," the squad leader barked. "Heads down." The corpsman crawled, elbows cutting tracks through the snow, and grabbed the second casualty by the harness. The moment he started to drag, another crack punched the air. The corpsman flinched, missed by inches, and froze. The squad understood then, not as theory but as skinned truth. The shots were timed to motion. Predatory, patient, intentional. The designated marksman tried to find the shooter by the sound, but the city threw the crack back at him from a dozen directions. Snow and broken concrete turned the report into a riddle. He lifted his head just enough to see over a slab. A ghost shot answered instantly. The marksman's helmet snapped back as if yanked by a rope. He collapsed, breath leaving him in a raw puff. His optic clattered onto the concrete, rolling, and the squad leader saw the hairline crack spidering across its lens. Now their best long-range eye was blurred. The squad leader's mind ran through protocol like a checklist. Smoke, suppression, shift, call for help. None of it worked when you couldn't see what you were shooting at and your radio was a brick. Static chewed at the air. Then, different. A single rifle report cut through the chaos, clean and controlled, coming from somewhere off-axis. Not panicked, not hurried. A shot fired the way a surgeon makes an incision. For a half-breath, everything held. And one of the invisible shooters, one of the ghosts, stopped firing. It wasn't dramatic. There was no scream, no falling silhouette, no cinematic tumble off a roof. Just absence. The pressure that had pinned the squad eased like a hand lifting from the throat. Marines traded confused looks. The squad leader swung his head, trying to locate the angle of that shot, but the glare and buildings swallowed it. "Who fired?" he hissed. Nobody answered. Nobody on comms claimed it, because nobody on comms could even talk. At the edge of the squad's world, half shadowed by a chunk of wall, a quiet figure crouched with gloved hands resting lightly on a rifle as if it belonged there. Her breathing was steady. Her eyes didn't flick in panic. They tracked, measured, solved. She looked like she'd already decided the city's puzzle had an answer. Somewhere out there were 17 snipers, and someone had just proved they could be found. Hours earlier, the same city had seemed like a photograph, gray-blue winter light, streets lined with frozen cars, wind combing snow into ripples against curbs and doorways. The district had been half evacuated, then abandoned. Power lines sagged like dead vines. Windows were boarded or shattered. A mural on a wall, once bright, was now peppered with old bullet scars and covered in frost at the corners, as if the cold was trying to preserve what violence had ruined. The squad had assembled in the lee of a concrete barrier while their platoon commander pushed the brief through numb fingers. "Quick sweep," he'd said. "Coalition liaison point. Grab the package. In and out. We've got a tight extraction window." He didn't say the word sensitive like it was dangerous. He said it like it was heavy. Maps, hard drives, sensor logs, little pieces of truth that could be turned into ambushes if they fell into the wrong hands. The kind of data that didn't bleed, but still got people killed. "This area is supposed to be low resistance," the commander added, then paused as if he didn't believe his own sentence. "But another unit lost comms here last night. They had to pull back." The squad leader, same staff sergeant with a shovel jaw, had nodded as if it was all normal. He lived in the space between orders and reality, and he rarely allowed himself to notice the difference until it hurt. His squad was solid. A calm corpsman who treated fear like a symptom. A radio operator who protected his batteries like they were gold. A machine gun team whose discipline kept the rest of the squad honest. A designated marksman who could read a street like a book. And then there was the extra. She'd been attached last minute, additional manpower, the paperwork said. No fanfare, no introductions beyond a name and a rank. She was quiet, competent, and carried her gear like it was an extension of her body. The squad leader had looked her over once, eyes pausing on her lack of swagger, then filed her away as support. Somebody made a joke about paperwork Marines. Another said, "At least she can carry spare batteries." She didn't react. She just checked straps, tightened buckles, and kept her hands inside her jacket when she wasn't moving, warming batteries against body heat so they wouldn't drain in the cold. That was the thing about winter. Everything lied. Optics fogged, then cleared, then fogged again as temperature shifted. Metal stuck to skin if you touched it bare. Snow glare washed detail from the world until rooftops looked like blank paper. She moved through those lies like she knew their language. At one point she paused behind a wall, out of casual sight, and unzipped a pouch. Inside was a rifle that wasn't hers on paper, issued to someone else, tracked under a different serial, borrowed with the kind of informal permission that didn't show up in any report. She ran a quiet check. Action smooth, chamber clean, magazines counted. When she popped a lens cap, a strip of tape inside caught the light. A note. Simple. Handwritten. Private. She tucked it back before anyone could see. Later, the squad leader unfolded a map and oriented it by habit. She leaned in, not pushing, not challenging, and quietly shifted the paper a few degrees. "Wind's off the north," she said. "Drift lines don't match your orientation." He blinked, irritated at first, then looked at the snow ripples along the curb, the way they feathered and piled. She was right. He didn't thank her. He just adjusted the map and continued, as if the correction had been his idea all along. They passed the mural, frosted edges, bullet scars like punctuation, and she slowed, eyes scanning it. Not for art, for markings, for something scratched into paint that didn't belong. The squad leader noticed her pause. Keep moving. She moved. A local guide was supposed to meet them at a corner where a street sign lay toppled, half buried. The guide never showed. They waited 2 minutes. Then 3. The squad leader glanced at the sun's position and the extraction time in his head, and impatience hardened into decision. "We're going," he said. The radio operator shifted his pack, uneasy. "What if? We don't have time." They moved through wind-raked streets, rifles low, eyes high, boots careful. The extra set of hands stayed in the back half of the formation, not pushing to the front, not seeking attention. But she watched. "Clean snow," she murmured once, almost to herself, when a doorway's drift looked untouched in a way that didn't match the wind's pattern. "Dirty snow," she noted later, when grit had been scattered across a rooftop edge where wind shouldn't deposit it unless something had disturbed the surface. Tiny tells. Prepared positions. They approached the intersection that would become the kill box, still unaware they were walking into geometry designed by someone who understood Marines as well as Marines understood themselves. High ground, funnel streets, and one rooftop cornice that looked suspiciously intact. Too clean, too preserved, like it had been kept whole for a purpose. The squad leader didn't notice. The quiet one did. Back in the intersection, time stopped being minutes and became movements. The corpsman tried again, inching the casualty backward. He kept his body low, face close to the snow, the way you moved when you knew the sky could kill you. A third shot cracked, so fast it felt like it had been waiting for the first muscle twitch. The corpse of calm shattered. Marines pressed their faces into their cover and fought the instinct to lift their heads just to understand what was happening. "Radio," the squad leader snapped. The radio operator twisted knobs, switched channels, tried alternates, tried the emergency net. Static. Bursts of interference. A faint pulse like a heartbeat that didn't belong to any human. "Nothing clean," he said. "They're sitting on us." Visibility started to degrade even though it was still broad daylight. Wind kicked up powdery snow that slid across the street in sheets, turning windows into shifting mirrors. Glare became movement. Movement became illusion. The squad leader picked a likely shooter lane, an upper window with a broken frame that gave a clean angle on the intersection. "Put rounds in that opening," he ordered. Suppressive fire barked. The machine gun chattered in short bursts, disciplined, controlled. Rifles answered. Concrete chipped. Glass dust fell. Nothing else. The enemy didn't respond with volume. They responded with precision. A shadowed recess swallowed the next crack, and another Marine behind cover jerked as if punched. A graze, not a kill, deliberate. A warning. A reminder, we can touch you whenever we want. Then an RPG team appeared. Just for a second, 2 figures popping up from behind a wrecked truck at the far edge of the intersection. They didn't fire to destroy the squad. They fired to pin them. The rocket slammed into the street behind the Marines, exploding in snow and concrete, throwing debris that rattled like hail. It wasn't aimed to kill. It was aimed to deny movement. Mortar rounds began to walk closer. First one hit 2 streets away, dull thump. Then another closer, sharper. Then another, close enough that the shockwave slapped the squad's chest through their plates. Bracketing. Someone was observing and adjusting. Ammo started draining fast. Suppression against unseen targets burned magazines without results. The machine gun barrel grew hot, then dangerous. Heat in cold air meant condensation, frost, unpredictable performance if they paused too long. The corpsman's casualty was bleeding slow but steady. In cold air, blood thickened, but shock didn't care about temperature. The casualty's eyes fluttered, unfocused, and the corpsman's voice stayed steady as he spoke through clenched teeth. "Stay with me. Don't go to sleep." The squad leader tried protocol. He popped smoke to conceal their movement. The wind shredded it. The smoke didn't hang. It streamed, broke, and revealed gaps like torn cloth. Weiss, the snow glare made the smoke less effective. It turned into a gray veil that did nothing against shooters who were already invisible. The designated marksman, now half-blind through his cracked optic, crawled to a better angle anyway. He tried to peer through a sliver between a broken curb and a slab. A crack answered immediately, and he slammed down flat, swearing. The squad leader felt control slipping, not in loud panic, but in the quiet way reality stops obeying training. That's when the quiet one crawled to him. She moved low, sliding between cover like a shadow, using wind gusts to mask a sound. When she reached him, she didn't waste words. "This geometry isn't built to kill you fast," she said, voice calm. "It's built to keep you alive and trapped." He stared at her, disbelieving. "What?" "They are hurting you," she said. "They want you here until something arrives." As if on cue, a distant engine note echoed off buildings. It could have been friendly extraction, or enemy reinforcements sealing the net. The squad leader swallowed. He looked around, seeing the intersection not as a street but as a pen. "Who are you?" he demanded, not because he didn't know her name, but because he suddenly realized he didn't know anything that mattered. She didn't answer the question the way he asked it. "I can't fix your radio," she said. "I can't win this from Hay." Then she reached for a rifle with intent, not panic. And the squad leader understood. She wasn't reacting. She was choosing. The squad leader's first instinct was refusal. Protocol demanded the squad stay together. You didn't split in an urban fight, not when the enemy had height and you had no comms. But protocol assumed you had options. They didn't. "You leave, you die alone," he hissed. "If I stay," she said, "you die together." He hated the clarity of it. "Name," he demanded again, softer now, not as authority, but as a man trying to anchor something in chaos. She gave him one. Short, plain, easy to forget if you weren't listening. Then she made it clear she wasn't asking permission. She took only what she needed. The rifle, limited magazines, a spare battery tucked inside her jacket for warmth, a simple range reference she'd drawn by hand, and a strip of cloth to dull glare on exposed metal. She couldn't sprint. Snow would shout her movement. She moved in deliberate slides, timing every shift with wind gusts so her crunch disappeared under the city's own breathing. She chose a route the rest of the squad had written off as impossible, an interior stairwell filled with ice, steps collapsed in places, handrails twisted. She climbed with fingers that never touched bare metal, careful not to leave heat prints where they didn't belong. Breath control mattered. In cold air, breath became a signal flay. She turned her face into her collar knee openings, exhaled slow, kept vapor tight to fabric instead of spilling into the light. She passed signs of enemy preparation that the squad below would never see. Firing holes that had been pre-chipped into walls, then sanded smooth so edges wouldn't cast a silhouette. Snow salted with grit to hide disturbed patches. Decoy apertures, obvious holes meant to draw attention, while the real ports were deeper, angled, shadowed. That was the trick behind invisible snipers. They weren't hiding behind the obvious window frames and rooftop lips. They were buried in recesses, firing from darkness into glare, using the city's broken geometry to erase themselves. She climbed past a collapsed floor, used a narrow maintenance ladder that rattled if you treated it like a ladder. She didn't. She treated it like a test. Weight shifted slowly, rung by rung, no sudden movement. At the top she eased into a half-roof line, not a dramatic rooftop with open sky, but a cramped space behind broken vac housing, where snow drifted in wind-built shapes that looked random to anyone who didn't read snow like a language. She settled behind one drift that had formed naturally around a vent pipe. It was perfect. Natural cover that didn't look like cover. Below, the intersection was chaos. Gunfire cracked. RPG blasts through snow and dust. Mortar thumps rolled like distant thunder. Up here, it was hush. The city's violence muffled by height and insulation. The only loud thing was her heartbeat, and even that she managed like a tool. She tested angles with small shifts of her body, not lifting her head high, not giving the sky a silhouette. A sliver view opened, enough to see the kill zone, but more importantly, enough to see sideways into the enemy's overwatch chain. She listened. Faint clicks, low murmurs, the subtle sound of someone manipulating equipment. And then, distinct, a repeating electronic chirp, faint but regular. Not loud enough to hear in a firefight unless you were searching for it. Jammer control, her mind supplied. Or drone feed. She tracked the sound across rooftops with patience. Wind shifted. Snow eddies formed around one rooftop seam in a pattern that didn't match the rest. Tiny spirals, like the air was warmer there, venting from inside. Occupied. She didn't smile. She didn't feel triumph. She felt the cold certainty of a solution. She settled in, rifle steady, breathing calm, eyes tracking like she'd already solved the whole equation and was now waiting for the numbers to line up. Silence before violence. She didn't hunt bodies. She hunted control. That was the difference between panic and competence. Panic tried to make the danger disappear. Competence tried to make the danger manageable. Her eyes moved across rooftops and windows and broken upper floors, not looking for the most obvious shooter but for the pieces that made all the shooters deadly. A ladder formed in her mind, priorities arranged like steps out of a pit. First, the jammer. Without it, the Marines would breathe again. Coordination would return. The enemy's trap would lose its teeth. Second, the link-adjusting mortars. Without it, the indirect fire would drift from precision to noise. Third, the RPG team leaders. Without them, the squad could move without a rocket punishing every step. Fourth, the sniper team leads. The ones directing timing, lanes, and discipline. Fifth, everyone left who still threatened the exit. She found the jammer by the same truth she'd used all morning. Snow never lied. Warm air vented from a small structure on a roof. A thin antenna angled against the wind. A shadow inside moved in a way that didn't match the drifting fabric of a keratin. She waited until the figure leaned into the equipment, hands occupied, posture committed. One controlled shot. The electronic chirp stopped. Down below, the radio operator flinched, then stared at his handset as it sputtered back to life in broken fragments. This is static. Say again, more static. But the pulse underneath was gone. The squad leader's face hardened into focus. Higher. Where? He forced the words through the crackling. We're pinned. Need extraction adjustment. Need. The reply came garbled, but it came. The Marines weren't alone anymore. Above them, she shifted her focus to the mortar link. Mortars didn't walk themselves. Someone was watching impact, correcting, feeding adjustments. She found the spotter not by face, but by behavior. A figure that wasn't firing, wasn't scanning like a shooter, but was peeking in brief, disciplined intervals, eyes down at the intersection, then down at something in hand. Calling shots. She waited for the posture that confirmed the role. Head angled, hand raised, mouth moving. One shot. The figure vanished backward into shadow. The next mortar round hit wide. Then wider. Then the bracketing stopped being a cage and became background noise. The RPG team tried to reassert itself. The leader popped up, gesturing, trying to coordinate. The loader fumbled with a rocket, exposed for an instant too long. She took the loader first, because removing the hands removed the threat faster than removing the voice. The leader turned, startled, trying to drag the weapon into cover. She waited until he committed to the movement that exposed his shoulder. Another controlled shot. The intersections don't move, threat cracked, not fully gone, but shaken. Below, the squad leader used the breathing room. With comms sputtering and mortars drifting, he coordinated smoke with the wind. Timed bursts, not desperate clouds. He ordered a casualty drag during a gust that carried smoke across their lane, not away from it. The corpsman moved like he'd been given permission to survive. The enemy noticed. They weren't incompetent. They'd built this trap with intention. They'd expected Marines to break under the pressure of invisibility and isolation. Now something was breaking their pressure. Snipers stopped firing in singles. Their discipline shifted into a counterhunt. They began shooting to bait, rounds striking near likely rooftop positions, trying to force movement, trying to catch a silhouette against snow glare. A small drone rose from behind a building edge, buzzing like an angry insect, searching rooftop lines. At the same time, climbers began moving through interior stairwells, dark figures slipping into the buildings, using the same maze she'd used, trying to flush the unseen shooter who was unraveling their plan. Constraints stacked on her like weight. Ammo count dropped. She wasn't spraying. She was still paying for every shot with a magazine she couldn't replace. High optic began to fog at the edges from temperature shifts. She wiped it between breaths, careful not to scratch the lens, careful not to expose too much skin. The drone's angle shifted, scanning for unnatural shapes in snow. Flankers climbed, boots quiet, weapons ready. And the extraction clock shrank, voices on the restored radio warning that air could only hold for minutes. Too much risk, too much exposure, too many unknowns. Then the enemy introduced a constraint she hated more than any of the others. A bundled civilian, small, shaking, was shoved onto a rooftop near Sniper Port. A gunman kept a hand on the civilian's shoulder, forcing the body into the open like a shield. The message was clear: shoot us, and you shoot them. She felt something sharp in her chest. Anger, maybe, or the kind of cold disgust that made her vision sharpen. She didn't rush. She shifted the ladder. The gunman controlling the civilian became the priority, but only if the shot was clean. She watched the rhythm of his grip, watched the way he yanked the civilian back and forth, using the body as cover. She waited for the moment the civilian stumbled, and the gunman instinctively pulled them aside to regain control, an unthinking motion that exposed his own line for a fraction of a second. Her shot took him in that fraction. The civilian dropped to the rooftop, free, crawled, desperate, out of the port's line. She didn't take another shot until she saw the civilian disappear behind cover. Fear didn't vanish. It just got managed. Below, the squad leader saw an opening he hadn't had 5 minutes earlier. "Move," he barked. "On my mark, go." The Marines shifted, dragging wounded, using smoke and wind like tools instead of prayers. The enemy's counterhunt escalated. A heavier weapon, crew-served, came online, repositioning to rake rooftops. The sound changed from cracks to a ripping, sustained roar that chewed snow and masonry. They weren't trying to pick her off with finesse anymore. They were trying to erase the roof she existed on. She fired, then relocated, 2 meters into deeper shadow, sliding behind the vac housing, never moving in a straight line, never giving the drone a clean red. The heavier weapon poured fire into her last position, shredding snow into mist. She didn't flinch. She listened through the roar for something else, the thing that would make this entire trap make sense. And then she saw him. Not the loudest, not the most obvious. A figure positioned where he could see multiple teams. Not firing, directing. He used hand signals. He used a secondary radio. His posture was the posture of someone who believed the city belonged to him. The true coordinator, the lead sniper, the commander of the ambush. If she broke him, cohesion would break with him. But he wasn't careless. He exposed himself only in slivers, moving like someone trained to survive other snipers. She waited through chaos for one unrepeatable exposure. The moment he leaned forward to confirm a team's position, trusting snow, glare, and distance to protect him. Her turning point shot was calm, precise, final. The commander vanished from view. The effect rippled instantly. Snipers fired unsynchronized, losing their timing. Mortar support paused, uncertain. Flankers hesitated in stairwells, suddenly unsure which direction was safe. The heavier weapon stuttered, then redirected, then stuttered again. Cohesion fractured. That was when the squad exploited the opening. The squad leader pushed them out of the kill box in a coordinated sprint under timed smoke. The machine gun team laid disciplined bursts, not wild, but purposeful, to keep heads down. The corpsman dragged the casualty with teeth clenched, refusing to stop, refusing to let the cold decide. She continued her work, not chasing glory, but protecting the escape route. One sniper who tried to re-establish overwatch on the exit lane, gone. Another who shifted to cover the alley, gone. A third who exposed himself to confirm targets, gone. 17 in total by the end, each tied to a tactical need, each a link in a chain she broke one by one until the chain couldn't hold anything. Then the closest danger arrived. A flanker reached her rooftop level. She heard the scrape of a boot on ice, the soft click of a weapon being shouldered. Breath, loud in cold air, not hers. She didn't wail dramatically. She didn't shout. She slid deeper into shadow, rifle close, letting the flanker step into the space where the light from the snow glare cut hard. For a moment, There were two shapes in a ruined city, separated by meters and intent. She made a final, quiet decision, one that didn't feel like heroism, only necessity. And then she was moving again, not chasing the fight, but leaving it, because the squad below needed her alive more than the enemy needed her dead. The extraction zone was a rooftop 2 blocks away, marked by a panel that snapped in the wind like a flag. The air above it thumped with distant rotors, and the sound felt unreal after hours of cracks and blasts. The squad arrived battered, breathing hard, faces streaked with soot and melted snow. They carried their wounded like fragile cargo. Their eyes kept flicking back toward the intersection as if expecting the city to reach out and drag them back in. The squad leader paused at the rooftop edge, looked back one last time, and saw only glare and drifting snow where a cage had been. They should have died there. They didn't. She appeared late. Not triumphantly. Not with a swaggering walk or dramatic reveal. She stepped out of a side stairwell like she'd always been part of the building, frost on her lashes, a near-empty magazine pouch hanging from her rig. Her gloves were dusted white. Her breath was controlled, but her shoulders carried the subtle stiffness of someone who'd been holding tension in her body for too long. The corpsman looked up, stunned. The radio operator stared at her like he'd finally put a face to a miracle. The squad leader didn't speak at first. He just watched her, really watched, like he was seeing a person for the first time. Medics worked fast. Wounded stabilized. The reality of survival was messy. Blood in snow, trembling hands, the sharp smell of antiseptic fighting the metallic scent of fear. In the debrief that followed, inside a half-warmed room where everyone's voices sounded too loud, Haya finally confirmed what she'd suspected. The enemy hadn't built the trap just to kill Marines. They'd built it to capture and erase the liaison data, maps, hard drives, sensor logs, and to force a propaganda win. Trap Marines in a daylight kill zone under comms blackout, film the chaos, show the world that even trained forces could be made helpless. The missing guide hadn't been an accident. He'd been turned, pressured, bought, maybe threatened with someone else's life. Used to confirm timing and route so the ambush could lock perfectly. Rooftops had been pre-cut with angled firing ports. Decoy apertures had been placed to draw return fire. The jammer had been positioned to collapse the platoon net at first contact, so isolation would do the rest. The squad leader listened, jaw tight, anger and relief mixing into something heavy. Then his gaze returned to her. Someone asked where she'd learned to read wind and snow like that. She hesitated, just a fraction. Not because she didn't have an answer, because answers had costs. She'd trained cold-weather urban overwatch before, attached to a reconnaissance element. Good enough that people noticed. And when people noticed, attention followed, good and bad. She'd learned that being the best in the wrong room could make you a target long before a bullet ever did. So she'd gone quiet, stayed useful, stayed overlooked. She didn't say any of that as a speech. It came out in small fragments and careful words. Enough to explain, not enough to invite the wrong kind of curiosity. Later, when the squad leader finally had a moment alone with her, he asked about the strip of tape inside her lens cap. She didn't flinch this time. She popped it open and let him see. 3 words, handwritten. A reminder, not a motto. Breathe, count, move. Because courage wasn't the absence of fear. It was a refusal to let fear choose for you. The squad leader closed the cap gently, like it was something fragile. He looked at her, this quiet operator he'd dismissed as an extra set of hands, and something changed in his expression. Not worship, not dramatic gratitude. Respect. He'd counted the enemy dead in his head like a man trying to prove the impossible. He'd reached 17 and stopped, convinced he'd miscounted. Now he said it out loud in the debrief, voice rough. 17, he told the room. Then he corrected himself, as if correcting the story mattered. Not luck. Discipline. Nobody cheered. Nobody clapped. But a Marine from the machine gun team shifted his chair slightly, making space beside him without looking like he meant anything by it. A place in the circle, not at the edge. She sat down without ceremony. Outside, the blue winter light faded toward afternoon, and the city returned to its brittle silence as if it had never screamed at all. On the rooftop where the rotors beat the air, She lowered her rifle and flexed her fingers, steady despite the cold, steady despite what she'd done. The squad leader stood beside her and looked out over the snow glare and ruined rooftops, thinking about how close they'd come to being erased from the world. He didn't try to dress it up. He didn't offer a speech. He just said the truth, quiet enough that it belonged to them alone. "Guess the city wasn't empty," he murmured. She watched the wind draw new lines in the snow, fresh patterns over old scars, and answered with the same calm that had saved them. "No," she said. "It just wanted us to believe it was." And in the bright, cold daylight, with silence settling back over the streets like a blanket, the final image held, a quiet figure, once overlooked, standing steady, proof that even in a world built to make you invisible, discipline could still be seen.